This last Thursday, which was July 17th, I was minding my own business, browsing the Steam store page when I came across a game that I had never heard of before. I wasn't sure how it had completely flown under my radar, especially since after seeing the trailer and reading the description, this felt like the perfect game for me. I had wondered how long ago it had released, only to find out that it had come out that day, July 17th. I saw this as fate, as if God himself was giving me a clear sign. This is the next game you should play. This is the next video you should make. Obviously, I purchased the game and hopped right in, and frankly, what I found astounded me. This wasn't just a cool game, this wasn't just a fun game, it was something genuinely special. I was just excited to play it as I'm just excited to tell you about it now. A musical gaming masterpiece called Fretless, The Wrath of Riffson. The story of Fretless is simple and straightforward. You play as Rob, a musician who dreams of making it big. However, the biggest label company, Super Metal Records, which is run by Rick Riffson, is corrupt at its core. Riffson uses a yearly battle of the bands to draw in talent, specifically targets the ones blinded by greed or fame, and binds them with a devious contract in order to control them and the industry as a whole. The plot and characters are silly and bombastic. While the story isn't the most complex, it does a good enough job at getting you out in the world, pushing you towards the call of adventure, and most importantly, getting you into the gameplay. At its core, Fretless is a mashup of gaming genres. It is a turn-based RPG with deck building mechanics mixed with rhythm game vibes. Now, when I thought about all of those genres being mixed together, I was a little concerned at first. Sometimes too many mechanics or ideas mixed together can feel disjointed. I like to think of a game like a pizza and the genres and ideas as toppings. Sure, you could put every topping on the menu on it just to say that it's there, but that can muddle flavors and result in something that tastes terrible. For Fretless, I'm happy to say that is not the case. These genres are blended so seamlessly that I often forgot that I was bouncing around different types of systems. All of the different genres melded together in a perfect, synergistic cohesion that made the game just feel like it kept building upon itself. What kept me completely hooked was the combat. As stated earlier, Fretless is a turn-based RPG. You run into an enemy, a fight starts, and you take turns beating each other up. However, Fretless differs from the typical RPG in a lot of ways. Firstly, since it's a game all about music, instead of using swords and shields, your arsenal is filled with musical instruments. Depending on which instrument you use, you will have a deck of cards, or rather riffs as they're called in Fretless. You can choose up to 3 riffs per turn, then play out what you've selected, then the enemy does their turn and the cycle repeats. What keeps the gameplay so exciting and fresh in my opinion is the fact that you can boost the damage of your attacks by successfully hitting the button when the attack lands. This is very reminiscent of Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario, where you feel like you're active in every step of the gameplay, not just selecting a choice in a menu. However, Fretless goes a step further, and these activation times are on the beat of the song, playing during the battle. It goes the same for blocking enemies as well. This made the overall combat system just pop for me. It genuinely felt like I was using the power of music to defeat enemies because I was having to learn how my attacks worked and making sure to hit the button right on the beat. On top of that, each instrument has its own ultimate attack, built up on the crescendo meter. Once activated, you play out a solo that's something akin to Guitar Hero or other rhythm games, and the more notes you hit correctly, the more damage it does. This combat was so fun for me that it just kept bringing me back over and over again, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. All I've really done is talk about the bare bones of how the combat works, but what really pushes this game beyond is its style. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Fretless is a work of art. If you've seen some of my videos in the past, then it's no secret that I absolutely love pixel art. I only say that to preface that this might actually be some of the best pixel art I've seen in a game. From every attack animation from Rob, to the ingenious enemies all tied together with the music themes and their varied attack animations, to the jaw-dropping animations from the crescendos or boss fights. I caught myself several times missing QTEs because I was too busy admiring the expressive movements in all of the fights. There are different animations depending on what instrument you use, and there are different animations for every single attack. Pixel art is so simple in theory, but that's where it can often truly shine. When you can take a block blocky character and make him move around in a seamless way, it can elevate what people often write off as simple and boring art style and transcend it into something special. I was in love with Fretless right out of the gate just from the art style alone, and that's not even the end of the high praise that I have for the game. I stated in my Undertale video that I am a massive fan of video game soundtracks, even having a small vinyl collection of some of my favorites. Without a doubt, the Fretless vinyl soundtrack is going to the top of my future wish list. The game menu opens with this simple, gentle, melodic acoustic guitar, and before you know it, you are sweating out a boss fight to the most fiery, bombastic metal that just elevates the intensity of the fight. Fretless does an excellent job balancing out the tones of each area and fight with just the soundtrack alone. What really blew my mind though, what really took it over the top for me, is that the fight music changes depending on what instrument you're using during the fight. I don't want to spoil too much talking about all the instruments and too much depth, even though they're all showcased in the trailer, but I do want to talk about the bass. Personally, I have a long background in music. I grew up in choir, and along the way I learned how to play a few instruments, guitar, piano. I've even messed around with a mandolin here and there. But the instrument that's always been at the core of my heart is the bass. I will say that I am not particularly good at any instrument. I haven't put in the time or the practice in order to be considered talented in any way, but I can still play along on some pretty simple songs. That said, that ultimately didn't matter to me. To get into battle with my bass in my hand and just start hearing that funky bass line just slapping down the melody was so captivating to me. In fact, if I'm being totally honest, I could have probably played the entire game with just the bass alone, but I made an effort to try to play all the instruments a good portion of the game, and I'm so glad I did. Earlier, I explained the basics of combat, and I glossed over the fact that depending on what instrument you used, you'd have different riffs to play, but that was very much an understatement. Each instrument felt like they all had their own unique playstyles. To compare it to a more traditional fantasy RPG game, going from the acoustic guitar to the bass wasn't like going from one sword to another, but rather a sword to a bow or a wizard's staff. In other words, it felt like each instrument had its own unique identity, focusing on different strategies. Each one had different passives, which would more or less change the way you'd want to approach battle. This was only furthered by the fact that you could find or even buy more riffs and were able to shape your deck fitting around certain win conditions. Since I've talked about the bass the most, I'll use it as the example. The bass's passive is all about slap damage. You have a bar at the top that shows just how much slap you've built up. For every point of slap damage you've got in the meter, it will add on that amount to any riff that does slap damage. At the end of your turn, if you have 10 or more slap, it will reset. When explaining it, it sounds fairly simple, but it ultimately becomes this sort of juggling act. There are certain riffs that will do damage based on your slap meter and a multiplication. There are also riffs that can double your current slap meter. While using the multiplication riff is the easiest way to blast some good damage, the reality is that any riff with slap damage is enhanced by the meter. So even if you don't have the big wombo combo lined up, you can still dish out tons of punishment as long as you just play your cards right. And again, this is just one of the 4 instruments. If you want, your strategy and playstyle can be absolutely simple. Hit as hard as possible and take as little damage as possible. Or it can be complex, juggling negative status effects on the enemy while buffing yourself and dealing damage in some really clever roundabout ways. And what still amazes me is that if it was just that system alone, just the instruments and their mutable riffs, I would have been satisfied completely, but there was still more stuff. Each instrument can be modified with different strings or pickups or accessories to give them passive boosts or bonuses, some of them being straightforward like doing extra damage, while others are more complex but leaning into that weapon's specific playstyles. Then, on top of that, there are pedals found throughout the world that give you even more passive buffs that can really up your playstyle as well. It just felt like every time I said to myself, wow, this is a really cool and unique battle system, I never expected so much, the game would just throw in another mechanic that added another layer of depth and complexity. And then the pixel art for modding the instruments and the pedals look so good, you are killing me, Fretless. But even after all of this high praise and genuine appreciation for the game, I've got to get to the part that I've been honestly dreading, because when it comes down to it, Fretless isn't a perfect game. Okay, I am prefacing this as transparently as possible. When it comes to any game I review, I always have in the back of my mind a pros and cons list, and this is the section of cons. I genuinely loved Fretless, and frankly, the negatives I bring up are much more nitpicky than anything, but it's important for me to talk about it because some of these things can be a make or break situation for some gamers, and it's my due diligence to be candid about them. I think it's better for me to be honest about these minor things and have some potential players think twice about their purchase rather than dive in from the recommendation and end up hating the experience altogether. So with that out of the way, here we go. The biggest issue I have with Fretless is that it feels extremely linear. From the very beginning, you start the adventure and you basically go from one location to the next. There are little challenges or puzzles or hidden things here and there, but it wasn't quite enough to satiate a gamer's desire for exploration. It's a real shame because this world feels so beautiful and is intriguing, and ultimately I was hoping to see more of it. Now for me, a game like this being on the shorter side is no problem whatsoever, but I know for many people game length is a big deal. I finished Fretless in about 6 hours. I wasn't trying to speedrun, nor was I looking for every nook and cranny for every secret or trying to 100% the game. Just overall a casual playthrough, so I would imagine this is probably close to an average game length. Some people might see that on the shorter side, but personally I usually prefer a tight, precise experience that doesn't fill the game with pointless bloat. Now I know that sounds kind of contradictory, complaining that there wasn't more side stuff or things to explore, but then being happy that there wasn't any bloated padding for time, but to that I say, those are two different things. If you create a side area just to pad for time, then it's a bad side area. You can have interesting, fun side quests or areas to explore that don't feel like fluff. For example, there were some puzzles in this game, but frankly they were so few and far between, and furthermore, they were extremely rudimentary puzzles. They were so simple that it felt more like a chore to do than an actual challenge for the player. Personally, I think they could have been cut altogether, or better yet, replaced with something a bit more fitting to the theme. This next part is more of a missed opportunity in my eyes, but I was really wanting there to be an actual music playing mechanic in the game. Something like while you're just running about in the world, you hold down a key and press other keys and play different notes. Something akin to Link's Ocarina. This kind of system could have been used for puzzles, unlocking doors, with the different instruments all playing and sounding differently, etc. I think that it would have just been a perfect fit into the game, and I was a little disappointed it wasn't there in the final product. Now, those are my biggest complaints, but I have to say, it is so easy as a reviewer, or even as a consumer, to sit here and say, oh yeah, like why didn't you add in the music playing mechanic, or to like unlock puzzles. Like that kind of concept doesn't take a ton of extra coding, planning, animations, sound effects, so on and so forth. Like it also would be easy for me to sit here and be like, oh, why only 4 instruments? Why not 5? Why not 10? Why not 1 billion? It's really easy for me to sit here and stare at someone else's work and nitpick any kind of flaws that I can subjectively see. But the truth is, none of the negatives that I brought up are deal breakers for me. I often approach the cons section by asking myself, what's keeping this game from being the most perfect game ever made? And when you frame it like that, it's easy to see some of the setbacks or issues, and I bring those things up because I think it's important for potential gamers to know, and while I can come up with a few criticisms, hopefully, more constructive rather than damaging, here's the bottom line. Fretless was an amazing experience for me. Sure, it may have only been 6 hours, but I pretty much beamed with a smile for that entire 6 hours. The game was overall linear, but I didn't care because I was too excited to run to the next fight to try out my new deck strategy with a weapon I hadn't used a lot up until that point. Sure, I think that the puzzles could have been better, or there could have been some kind of music playing mechanic, but the combat, animations, and music were so top-notch that I didn't care if my subjective wish list was completely fulfilled. There's a video here on YouTube that I'll link down below of the developers of Fretless and their story of making the game. It's honestly such an emotional video discussing their fears, their struggles, their victories, their triumphs, the camaraderie that they built along the way, and the lessons that they learned. Before July 17th, I didn't know that this game, nor the people who developed it, existed. To stumble upon a game that is so clearly a project that is filled with genuine love and passion, not only for gaming, but also for music, has been such a delightful and unexpected blessing in my life this week. Fretless is probably one of the best, if not the best game I've played this year. It's a game that I want to share with you, with friends and family, and something that I want to see succeed. It's a game that reminds me why I love indie games so much. A work of art that wasn't made with only the bottom line in mind, trying to figure out how to squeeze every penny out of a passionate fan like they're nothing more than a cash cow. In some games, stories are just devices to push the game forward and don't feel like there's some underlying important message. While the story in Fretless is simple, it's ultimately about taking on an evil corporation with a corrupt CEO trying to take something that is special and magical, music, and turn it into a mindless money-making machine. Their story of making these games speaks through the game itself, really wanting to share something that is not only unique with the world, but is something that feels very personal and intimate. It takes a lot of bravery and resilience to work on something that you've poured your heart and soul into and then release it into the world, and they did just that. And I've got to say, I'm not only impressed with the outcome, but I'm inspired. Fretless will be a game I play through several times in my life. Playing through it for the first time will be a memory that I cherish forever. I'd love to see more from these developers in the future, and I cannot recommend this game enough. Man, I really hope there is a Fretless 2 in the future.